welcome everybody to another occurrence of Resilience Reimagined, the Dean's Speaker Series, the Deans of the Embry-Riddle Worldwide College of Arts and Sciences Speaker Series, which is me, in case you were in any doubt. I'm Alexander Siedschlag. I am so glad to see you here. Let me start with letting our thoughts go out to all those impacted by the horrific accident close to DCA Airport in Washington, D.C. earlier this week. And it of course, first and foremost, impacts all of those who lost loved ones and who lost their lives in the first place, and then who lost their loved ones. But it also impacts Embry-Riddle in two ways. Because number one, the pilot of the American Eagle flight that perished in the accident is our graduate. Unfortunately, he was an Embry-Riddle alumni. And number two, our university that is approaching its centennial traces its roots back to what now is American Airlines. So we, as the Embry-Riddle community, are impacted also, not as much as anybody who lost their lives or a loved one, or who were risking their lives in what was hopefully, hoped to be a rescue mission versus a recovery mission. But it also touches us directly here at Embry-Riddle. So a horrific accident, but it also tells us that what we do out of the College of Arts and Sciences and its programs is very, very important as we cover the safety to security continuum, including but not limited to human factors. So our work remains and is very important. Unfortunately, like in our Emergency Disaster and Global Security Studies department, horrific incidents and accidents and disasters like this underscore the relevance of our work and underscore the need for resilience that crosses the human and the technology sphere. So it is very, very sad. And with that, thank you for being here. And the Resilience Reimagined series does not define resilience, because it wants to be a part of, critically thinking about and reimagining the concept of resilience for different domains. But it references or comes out of the United Nations Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction definition of resilience that reads as follows: the ability of a system, community, or society, very important, system, community, or society, exposed to hazards, to resist, absorb, accommodate to, and to recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. Our virtual speaker series, Resilience Reimagined, hosts internal and external esteemed guests once a month to discuss fresh perspectives on a broad range of resilience topics. The series supports our college's strategic vision to be a true destination college for multidisciplinary studies and impactful collaborative research, as we strive to transform our students and the broader community into responsive, responsible global citizens. Now, today, we are proud to showcase our own pertinent programs and our own pertinent research in a spotlightish manner. We do so much more, but today we showcase that. And our two programs that are pertinent to this particular occurrence are the Bachelor of Science in Communication, that has a recent crisis risk and resilience communication specialization, and our master's program in human security and resilience, both delivered online 100%, and then also an ongoing research project that involves faculty, but also provides early or not so early research opportunities, but research opportunities to our students like Maya Adkins. And Maya Adkins is the first of the three presenters whom I'd like to introduce today. So under the title of Applying the Communication Theory of Resilience to Survivor-Centered Anti-Trafficking Organizations, Maya is an undergraduate student speaking to us today at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, where she is pursuing a BS in Homeland Security. And by the way, Embry-Riddle has now the first two accredited and the only two accredited Bachelor of Science degrees in Homeland Security nationwide, accredited by KMSHI. So congratulations to us. We're really proud, and this elevates that, right? So. But she is pursuing the BS in Homeland Security with minors in Global Conflict Studies, Psychology, and Geographic Information Systems, and has strong international experience herself and a strong background in international studies. Very important to talk about survivor-centered anti-trafficking organizations today, because today is also the last day of January, and this is also the last day of Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So this concludes that month for that matter. Then the second presenter is Julia Hoban, who is a faculty member with our college in the Department of Emergency, Disaster, and Global Security Studies, and the program chair for our previously mentioned Master of Science in Human Security and Resilience, delivered across the country and around the world, 100% online. Her PhD is in Global Affairs from Rutgers University, among other academic degrees and qualifications that she has. So thank you, Maya and Julia, for joining. And I charged Alex Reister with convening this session for us. So thank you to Alex for doing this. And Alex is a faculty member in our Department of Humanities and Communication, and the program chair for our Bachelor of Science, online Bachelor of Science in Communication, as well as the senior advisor for Vector, Worldwide's virtual communication and communication research and training center. And her Bachelor of Science and Communication has just reached a new level by, in addition to the aviation-related communication specialization that it has always had, having recently launched a crisis risk CRR, a crisis risk and resilience specialization that we also plan on making available as a standalone but embeddable certificate. Alex has a PhD in texts and technology from the University of Central Florida, among other qualifications. Her vision that she brought, and we are grateful for that, because that makes our communication program unique. The vision that she brought and is bringing to her program is to communicate for social change. And that is very much in line with our college's motto to foster innovative education and research, or to promote innovative education and research to foster positive change around the world. Alex is also a leader in civil society and academic associations efforts to contribute to the whole community effort of combating human trafficking. For example, she is on the membership committee for the Global Association of Human Trafficking Scholars. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor on to our three presenters. Thanks again and welcome all. And I'm sure our three presenters have a plan how to proceed. Regarding your questions, and it's great to see you on the chat and see where I'm located. We also have international participants. That is great. We'll proceed as always regarding our interaction here. So either as our three presenters are going to move along, leave your questions and comments in the chat, or towards the end of the hour here that we are setting aside for this occurrence, there will also be the opportunity to ask your questions live. Now, really, without further ado, please, Maya, Julia, and Alex, take it away. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Siedschlag, for those introductions, and thanks everyone for joining our presentation. It's great to see faculty, students, and even our MOOC participants joining today. And today we will be presenting our ongoing research project that examines how communication theory of resilience, or CTR, enhances the communication strategies of survivor-centered organizations in anti-human trafficking space. Our research is supported by the Embry-Riddle's first grant, 2024-2025. And in this study, we bridge communication, human security, and resilience study. And our objective is to offer practical applied solutions to strengthen the resilience of anti-trafficking organizations via CTR. Maya?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody, and once again, welcome. I just want to take a quick moment to personally introduce myself, but I appreciate that prior introduction as well. So my name is Maya, and I'm the student team member on this research project. And like mentioned before, I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's in Homeland Security at Embry-Riddle Daytona, and I plan on graduating this May, actually. So thank you all for being here. And I just wanted to start by taking a look at what we'll be talking about in today's presentation. So we plan on starting with an overview of our research background, including our mutual interests as a team, as well as the focus of this project and the key research questions we have identified through that. And then we plan on diving into the theoretical framework, really focusing on that communication theory of resilience and a human rights approach to human trafficking. We'll also be discussing why the communication theory of resilience matters and providing some examples of its applications as well. Next, we'll go over our current work, including everything dealing with funding, project interviews, our white paper, and data analysis steps of the research, followed by a look at related coursework available at Embry-Riddle. And then we'll be discussing what our next steps are going to look like for this research, and finally wrapping it up with that Q&A session.
Thank you, Yulia and Maya. So you have already heard about our disciplinary backgrounds. But how did we come together and start working on this research project? So when Dr. Hoban, when Yulia was hired at Embry-Riddle, we knew that we both had some experience working in the human trafficking realm. Yulia previously had research experience with Denver's Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking, and I had a little bit of community service and research related to human trafficking. And one day, when Yulia and I are brainstorming, thinking about a project, we get an email from Maya Adkins, who says, "Hi, I am a student at Daytona Beach. I would love to get more involved in research related to human trafficking." And it was such great timing for us to bring her on board. You can see again our three disciplines, but we definitely have overlapping interest among those three disciplines. And I would say sort of the biggest thing that drove us to move forward with our research together was that last thing that you see on your screen, our desire to really make a meaningful impact and meaningful community change related to human trafficking. So one thing I would like to lift up is just Maya's initiative of reaching out, cold emailing, if you will, a faculty member. And I would say do that if you're a student now, if you're a student in the future, if you're a future student. Reach out to faculty who you feel like you might want to support the research that they're doing, because Yulia and I have loved working with you, Maya, and I think it's such a valuable experience to work with faculty if you are a student. So I'm going to hand things over to Yulia to talk a little bit about our research project's focus.
Thank you, Alex. And yes, we want to provide some brief overview of what we are focusing on in this research. And I'll start just with brief discussion about the human rights violation and crime of human trafficking. So human trafficking is the exploitation of individuals through force, fraud, or coercion, and it is a pervasive crime with profound implications for societal and individual well-being and security. This crime transcends national and geographical borders, inflicting immediate and often permanent harm on those trafficked. As in our MOOC, we always say that human trafficking can happen anywhere. And consequently, in our research, we view human trafficking as a critical human security issue, affecting various dimensions of security, such as economic, health, and societal security. Survivor-centered approaches emphasize survivor agency, voice, and choice, and they have gained prominence within the broader human trafficking framework, and again emphasizing survivors' crucial role in prevention, protection, and prosecution efforts, which are three pillars in how different agencies and organizations try to address this crime. The survivor leadership model, which recognizes the fluidity of survivor experiences, resonates with the human rights approach to addressing the implications of this crime. The model has gained prominence in the nonprofit sector across the United States, and specifically government agencies, and organizations employing survivor leadership focus on rehabilitating survivors and prioritizing their empowerment and resilience. Survivor-centered approaches to human trafficking are also powerful for enhancing public awareness and challenging prevailing narratives or myths about human trafficking. And as survivors of this crime may have endured immense trauma, including physical violence, but also emotional and psychological distress, this approach allows survivors to lead the way on what healing and resilience means for them as individuals. So survivor leadership models thus align with efforts to acknowledge and uphold fundamental human rights. However, as we discovered, little research exists on the resilience of human trafficking survivors. So in this study, we explore communicative strategies underpinning resilience in survivor-centered models. The present study aims to better understand how organizations employing the survivor leadership model focus on community and individual resilience. And in this study, we investigate research questions that focus on how organizations employing survivor leadership communicate their mission, goals, and impact, as well as organizational narratives for resilience communicated by these organizations. Our research also examines the ways in which NGOs and government agencies develop multi-stakeholder collaborations in development and implementation of survivor-centered programming, as well as policies addressing the crime of human trafficking. Again, these may include joint task forces, advisory committees, or collaborative research initiatives aimed at shaping anti-trafficking strategies. In investigating collaborative efforts between government agencies and NGOs in anti-trafficking initiatives, we identify successful partnerships, challenges, and lessons learned for enhancing cooperation to create a more comprehensive and effective survivor-centered responses to human trafficking, which speaks to what Alex mentioned, our goal to really offer practical recommendations based on this research and to have the impact in the real world, so to speak. The findings of our study identify strategies, framing techniques, and narratives these organizations employ to convey their survivor-centered approach and contribute to the overall discourse on the human trafficking crisis. Theoretically, our research contributes to understanding of how to apply the communication theory of resilience to the human trafficking context and to advance the theoretical understanding of the complexities of survivor-centered approaches to human trafficking. And finally, practically, the implications of this research can guide nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and other actors in the anti-trafficking space to enhance their communication strategies about the crisis of human trafficking and to frame the issue from the perspective of survivors. Finally, findings also contribute to educating the public and raising that awareness about the issues, thereby fostering awareness and informed understanding. And Maya.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So really at the core of this research is the communication theory of resilience. So I want to start by just clearly defining a theory before later focusing on its significance and providing some examples. So developed by Dr. Buzinel, the communication theory of resilience really examines how individuals use communication practices to cope with disruptive events, such as human trafficking, and then how they really rebuild their lives by establishing that new sense of normalcy in the aftermath of trauma. So this theory identifies 5 key communicative processes that contribute to resilience. And that first one being this idea of crafting normalcy, as I mentioned before. So this is the idea of establishing routines and that sense of stability. This could be through a job training program that creates structure, for example. And that second process is affirming identity anchors. So more thinking about how people see themselves and then how they explain who they are to others. So an example of this could be an individual may see themselves as a survivor, and then that identity is reinforced by their family, their friends, and even their community. Therefore, these identity anchors help the individual stay grounded, especially during those difficult times and times of trauma. So by giving them that sense of who they are and where they belong. I think another important point with this one is the shift we see from victim to survivor and how this transformation really impacts self-perception and even that long-term healing process. Another process to identify is maintaining communication networks. So really looking at the importance of sustaining support systems to foster that resilience. Thinking about examples, these communication networks could come in the forms of survivor peer networks or mentorship programs. And the fourth process is identified as developing alternative logics, which is almost this idea of reframing challenges to better adapt and then move forward. So thinking about how survivors may reframe their past experiences and then advocate for change or help others or something along that line. And then finally, we have the process of foregrounding productive action while backgrounding negative emotion, which emphasizes proactive steps while managing distress. And I think the interviews we conducted have really shown how anti-trafficking organizations are helping survivors maybe focus on long-term goals rather than trauma alone, which is a great example of that. So really looking at each of these, the communication theory of resilience provides a framework for understanding how human resilience is built and then sustained through these communication processes that foster that ability to then create those new normalcies. And through our research, I think we've been fortunate enough to see this process firsthand in the organizations we've interviewed, really demonstrating how survivors are actively constructing resilience through these communicative strategies. I also just want to add why I see this being especially relevant to human trafficking survivors and just anti-trafficking work in general. You know, considering how survivors really face significant barriers in rebuilding their lives and emphasizing the interviews we conducted, this makes the resilience a super critical part of that recovery, which I think is another good reason to consider this.
Thank you, Maya. Absolutely. So Yulia and Maya have really summed up why this is such an incredible theory, even if you don't do communication research, an interdisciplinary theory that focuses on application. It's a very practical theory, which is why this is so helpful for our specific studies focus. But I also think this could be a great theory in the classroom. So if you have resilience concepts in your class, sharing this particular theory with students might really resonate with them, just in line with this whole, the idea of resilience reimagined, right? We're thinking about resilience as a communication process, as instead of perhaps something that's grounded only in a person's individual ability to sort of bounce back. And so this allows us to sort of shift our thinking about what resilience is, which can be really helpful for our students overcoming adversity in their personal lives, overcoming things that are happening in the classroom. But I also think that this can be really, really beneficial to our students who perhaps have military experience with fire or first responders, because this could really, really, I think, resonate with their work experiences as well. And I'll say this theory resonated so much with one of our communication students that he is applying it to his final project for before he graduates with his bachelor's in communication. And his goal is to create a website that is focused on not only providing resources for folks who are transitioning from military to civilian life, but also that creates that sense of community, which goes back to the 5 processes that Maya talked about. So we're also going to talk a little bit about this very important grounding in the human rights approach to human trafficking that intersects and overlaps with the communication theory of resilience to inform our overall study theoretical framework. Yulia.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, when we were framing the study, it was important for us to look at this crime of human trafficking from human rights perspective and emphasize again that it's not only security or criminal justice issue, but also deeply connected with human rights that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as I talked about previously, anyone can experience human trafficking. However, the risk often is heightened for certain populations due to intersecting vulnerabilities, especially those groups lacking basic and equal rights. Poverty, gender, and displacement status, when considered together, create layered vulnerabilities that traffickers exploit. And this perspective underscores that combating human trafficking, again, should be grounded in the human rights approach, which centers on rights such as dignity and agency of survivors. As I mentioned, grounded in the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this approach defines human trafficking as a violation of individuals' rights and centers on the survivors' efforts such as prevention and prosecution, and making sure that their voice is heard and that their agency is represented in those efforts. And probably something important to mention here is also, while we say that we want to center survivor voices and agency, we don't want to tokenize them. And that's again something we saw in the interview that the nonprofit organization pay close attention to. So while we want to amplify those voices, we want to just use them for some political objectives or anything that doesn't concern the benefits of survivors. Scholars emphasize that a human rights approach may be contrasted with the rescue model of victimization, and in the centering of survivor needs and the emphasis on survivors' agency. A failure to center human rights in the prevention of human trafficking and protection of survivors may result in victimizing the victims and leading to additional human rights violation. And research also shows that it could often result in those survivors being re-trafficked. Besides violating human rights, human trafficking is often situated at the intersection of threats to human security, serving as a significant source of income and tool to advance the interests of non-state armed groups and criminal networks. Crisis situations exacerbate the risk of human trafficking, including disasters, conflict, war, global pandemics such as COVID-19 and climate change. And these situations erode individuals' resilience, increasing the risk for them to fall victim of human trafficking. Survivor-centered models also align with the human rights-based approach by emphasizing the importance of designing programs that want to enhance the human rights development. And last but not least, in addition to resilience narratives, the resilience narratives play a crucial role in shaping public awareness and understanding of human trafficking. By framing the experiences of survivors through this human rights lens, organizations contribute to challenging entrenched norms and fostering empathy. And these concepts are important for organizations working in this human trafficking space, as not all members of an organization may directly experience human trafficking. So trying to approach the survivors' experiences from that human rights approach is definitely critical. And back to you, Alex.
Thank you. And so Yulia already mentioned our study really fills a gap in the scholarship by applying CTR in the human trafficking context. But again, we have a couple of examples here in case you find this theory might work with your research. Whether you do research in higher ed, you can see CTR applied in the higher ed context here, disaster relief workers in the health context. And so we really do feel like this is a very important theory that could be applied in many contexts. And we encourage you, if you feel like what we've shared resonates with the research that you do, that you consider it in the future. And we're happy to share Buzzanell's original article as well as the studies that are on this slide. But we have been working together. It's very hard for me to like say this out loud and believe it. We've been working together since 2023. And we did some preliminary research that we wanted to do to sort of lay the foundation for our interviews. And you can see our presentation here listed on your screen. This was Maya's very first academic conference presentation experience. As you can tell from her presentation today, she is a star, but it was a packed room and we got so much great feedback on that sort of preliminary investigation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a second. But that paper, that study has been accepted and is coming soon this spring, early 2025, in the Journal of Crisis and Risk Communication. So if you're interested in reading the full study, that preliminary investigation, let us know and we would be happy to share that with you. But I do think, again, this speaks to the amazing support that we get from Embry-Riddle, from our College of Arts and Sciences, and from Dean Siedschlag to make sure that students, if they want to, can participate in research experiences, which we think is really, really important. And so what did we do for this preliminary study? We looked, and you can see here, the example on your screen is from GEMS Girls, which is a really heralded, cherished, survivor-centered, survivor-led organization that sets the bar in so many contexts for survivor-centered approaches to human trafficking. But what we did is we looked at 34 survivor-centered organizational websites. And what we wanted to do is look at how they were communicating their mission, their goals, and their impact, just to get a sense of, from public communication and the organizational website being the most prominent sort of form of how an organization communicates who they are and what they do. Did we see communication theory of resilience applications on that form of communication? And we did that knowing that we would then interview folks who were a part of those organizations who could perhaps give us a deeper dive into organizational programming and sort of the enactment of CTR in that organization. But what we found is that organizations who are really, really, really successful at communicating who they are and what they do in the survivor-centered context, first of all, they partnered with survivors and they said that. And so they sort of demonstrated on their website that survivor-centered approach through partnerships with survivors. And so Yulia mentioned the 3P focus to combating and preventing human trafficking. The 4th P is partnership. And so if we have organizations who are identifying survivors as partners, they're really being survivor-centered and communicating their work as survivor-centered. And one other thing that we saw in terms of effective organizational communication on these websites, we saw folks actually incorporating survivor voice. There was not, a CEO speaking on behalf of a survivor. There was a survivor quote. There was an example of a survivor art project from an art therapy class. And it was just really important that we saw survivor narratives, but not from the perspective of the organization, from the perspective of the survivor demonstrated on these websites. Now, just one important thing that I would be remiss if I didn't add. Organizations really are ethical about making sure that they either do not list the survivor name, or they use a pseudonym, or they just list a survivor first name, or maybe they even say A, instead of Alex, to protect the survivor's privacy, which is really important because human trafficking, as Julia mentioned, is an ongoing human security concern. And so again, this foundation really helped lead into our current work. And I'm going to turn things over to Maya to talk to you a little bit more about our current project funded by our first grant.
Yes, thank you. So following this in terms of our current work and for our project interviews specifically, we began initial outreach back in October 2024, and we initially contacted 20 anti-trafficking organizations, primarily via email and even some website forms. And then we used snowball sampling to identify additional participants, which was definitely very successful in recommending organizations, that we had not originally identified ourselves, and that was very helpful throughout the interview process. And then once we began receiving responses from that, we conducted all our interviews via Zoom from October to December, which all three of us were very actively involved in that interview process, which was great. And these were semi-structured interviews. So we did have a prepared set of questions, about 17 in total, if I recall correctly, but this allowed for a flexible interview based on the flow of conversation. So each interview began with an introduction, which consisted of a discussion, about the organization's missions and goals before shifting towards that communication theory of resilience, specifically exploring how these organizations were helping survivors establish routines and that sense of normalcy, again, for one example. And we also included questions on policy development and advocacy, as well as some open-ended conclusion questions that allowed participants just to share their personal recommendations, successes, and even challenges in implementing that survivor-centered approach to human trafficking that they have seen throughout their work. And really considering all these different topics of conversations, these interviews were meant to explore how the organizations, once again, were employing that human trafficking survivor leadership model and the 5 processes I talked about earlier for the communication theory of resilience. And also to ensure a diverse range of perspectives, we included participants from nonprofits, U.S. federal agencies, as well as international organizations that had that U.S. presence. So this allowed us to examine different approaches to those communication strategies. And by the end of December, we conducted 27 interviews, so just shy of our initial goal of 30, which was great. And I think this process just provided a lot of invaluable insight into quite a wide range of organizations, I would say. Every interview was very different, and you can see through the participant categories, each had its unique perspective within our research area. And then if you go to the next slide. So in terms of our project white paper following these interviews, we're developing a white paper to share with our participants. And this is going to help provide them with updates on our progress and a summary of key research findings so far. We have a lot of participants excited about our work and wanting to hear updates themselves. So this is a really great opportunity to highlight emerging themes and really ensure that the insights we gathered are shared back with the organizations that are contributing to this work themselves. So I think that's super important as well. And we also plan to submit our white paper for presentation at the 2025 International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, which is very exciting. And this conference is really looking at uniting the global community to not only learn, but as well connect and collaborate to combat human trafficking and promote that social justice. So we think with this mission in mind that it's an ideal platform to share our work so far and just an overall to contribute to the broader conversation on the survivor-centered communication strategies.
Absolutely. Your second international conference, Maya. So we just received our qualitative data analysis software last week. And so Maya has been really busy cleaning our interview transcripts. And our goal is to, in February and in March, work together to analyze that qualitative data so that we can get the white paper to the participants as soon as we can, but being as careful, of course, as we can. We did debrief after all of our interviews were finished. And what was really cool is that Yulia did some, Maya did some, I did some, but when we were finished, we debriefed and really did feel like we not only had data to fulfill our goal of writing a research paper about the communication theory of resilience, but also we had so much rich data that we had what we think might be 2 additional papers come out of this project, including Yulia taking the lead on a survivor-centered policy paper and even a paper on nonprofit organizational communication, which is, again, really needed in the human trafficking scholarship. And so working on writing up our findings, but I promise we will circle back with the interested folks from this group who might want to read that paper when it's time. So Dean Siedschlag mentioned the coursework at Embry-Riddle that we just want to make sure you can take a picture with your phone if you need to, that you know is available if you find this topic really, really interesting, if you find the communication theory of resilience interesting, if you find the topic of human trafficking awareness really interesting. We have an offering, a specialization in crisis risk and resilience communication in our BS in communication. We have a minor, and Julia, I will turn it over to you to talk about your Master of Science in Human Security and Resilience.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, so our Master in Human Security and Resilience, as Dean Siedschlag mentioned, is a fully online program that focuses on diverse domains of human security that I've also discussed in this presentation, from economic security to environmental security, and of course on peace and conflict studies as well. And in exciting news, we also just launched the certificate in the Master in Human Security and Resilience, and I wanted to mention it here. So it's this presentation coincided with the launch of the program, which will be available in July 2025 catalog. And I turn it back to Alex to talk about our 4+1 program.
Yes, it's a really cool offering, and thank you for your partnership on this, Julia. If you are obtaining your BS in communication, there is an opportunity for a combined program pathway with the master's program that Julia just mentioned. If you have questions, reach out to us. Maybe you are currently an undergraduate student or a graduate student at Embry-Riddle, and you might want to take a course related to some of the concepts that we've talked today. Reach out to us, and we would be more than happy to help you find that course as an elective, or maybe it's already a part of your minor, an option in your minor. So you can see sort of our project's next steps. One thing that I just wanted to make sure to mention today, because Maya was interested broadly in research on human trafficking, she is also helping Julia and I with our project, our research project related to the MOOC that we ran in the past that's running now. Offered by the College of Arts and Sciences on human trafficking. And so she's had some experience with research in human trafficking in higher ed contexts. But I think there is so much, of course, future research that is available, not only in terms of educational interventions, but thinking about how we can study human trafficking from other lenses, from other perspectives. And so Maya mentioned that she is graduating very soon. And we will turn things over to you, Maya, to tell us where you might be going next, where you could maybe continue human trafficking research.
Definitely. So in terms of my personal next step after graduation, I'm hoping to pursue a master's degree in international disaster psychology, trauma, and global mental health out in Denver. I really mention this because the research we're currently engaged in, I think, has the potential to inform some of my graduate studies, especially in understanding how communication strategies impact trauma recovery and resilience on that global scale. So I'm really looking forward to the possibility of exploring that further.
Keep us posted. Fingers crossed she'll find out soon. But I just sort of want to conclude on this slide by just again mentioning how important it was for all of us ethically for this type of research to have FIRST grant funding. So thank you, Embry-Riddle, for this support, because it was so important to us to pay our participants for their time, especially because so many of them, we did not ask them to identify if they were survivors, but some identified that they were survivors themselves of human trafficking. And so it's so important ethically to make sure that we are paying folks for their time in human trafficking related research. And as we turn things over to all of you for questions, I just want to thank Maya and Julia for being the greatest research teammates I could ever ask for. I appreciate all of you. We appreciate all of you for spending some time with us today in support of our research on a Friday, but it was really important, as Dean Siedschlag mentioned, to present this at the conclusion of Human Trafficking Awareness Month in the United States. And of course, I want to thank you, Dean Siedschlag and Brianna, for hosting us at Resilience Reimagined. And we will turn things over to you all.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do. Any questions? I didn't pick up anything from the chat other than accolades that all of us echo. Oh, JR has a question. Would you like to take the mic and even read it out to make this very interactive? Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I just thought great presentation, everyone. That was very impressive, and congratulations on everything that you've been able to do and everything that's coming ahead. That's excellent. My question, it may be outside the scope of your research, but as you were talking about CTR, I started thinking about how does the shift from victim to survivor most often happen, and what helps the traumatized person be able to make that shift so that they can be a leader or advocate or what have you?
That is such a great question. We didn't even email him and have him ask it. I'm happy to start, and then Maya and Yulia, I know you both would probably love to jump in. JR, I think victim is a really important term to use and to continue to use in certain contexts, right? Legal contexts. But within the survivor community, what we found from our research, from the preliminary study and from interviewing folks, again, folks who work in nonprofit NGOs, government agencies, and those who identified as survivors themselves, there is like this electric power for survivors to be a part of a community who identifies as survivors, and especially folks who can say, I'm a survivor leader. I'm a peer leader. I can help others. And so that would be how I would answer your question. And then Yulia and Maya, you probably have things to add too.
Yeah. I'll go ahead, Maya. I will follow.
Okay. Definitely community is a big part of it. I think through the interviews, I learned a lot of time. It was this idea of empowerment through agency as well. You know, as survivors were gaining control of their choices, whether that was education, their employment, their economics, and just self-expression in general, they began to see themselves more than just that past trauma.
Yeah, and just seconding everything Maya and Alex said, I will just mention also taking at their own pace. I think that all nonprofits emphasize that survivors define how that process happens, yes, and when they're ready. Like we had stories that folks would take 15 years before they will be ready for this type of work, yes. So I think that was kind of an important thing to hear, that there is no right answer in this process, and pace is different for everyone. But something also that stood out from interviews is importance of routines and how establishing and grounding their behavior in every day, so to speak, becomes very important part of that transition. And again, thanks for the question. I think we should include it in our paper. That's a very important question.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate that.
Welcome, JR. Who wants to be next?
May I, sir?
Absolutely, Salman. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Actually, I'm a student of BS. I'm doing Bachelor in Political Science from Pakistan. So it's a tremendous work, a great work, and congrats to all of them by doing such a great work. I have a question regarding, I'm doing research on irregular migration as well as on human trafficking regarding South Asia. So my question from them that there are many organizations working on these things to control human trafficking, to control irregular migration. But maybe if you look at recent incidents which happened in different area in the world regarding human trafficking, so why the organization, maybe I can say that why they are not able to control these things? If means Maya or the other, they explain these things, that how can we control these human traffickings. And I met with some victims here who victimized by human the agents. They took money from them and all these things. and they were, so much traumatized. I met with them, with those people, and they said we will not do these things, because when they, repeat their story, so it was quite terrible. So how can we control all these things? We all know that it's not a good thing, but how the international organizations, United Nations or ICMPD, so how they will control these things? Thank you.
Well, I would say there is no short answer we can give you right now on how we control these things, but that is a really important area of research that a lot of my colleagues focus on. So our research focused on the communication dimensions of human trafficking, specifically in the organizational communication context. But what I would love to do, and I think this might be helpful for everyone, Dean Siedschlag mentioned at the top of the hour an organization that I'm a part of. It is the Global Association of Human Trafficking Scholars. And there are many international scholars doing research on that very question that you asked. And so I'll give you this link just so that you can go and see some of the most recently featured presentations and publications. But I'm happy to put my email in the chat and send you some literature and book chapters specifically that can help you sort of wrap your arms around that very big question without an easy answer.
Yeah, that should be good if you share these books or papers with me, because I am doing research on it, and I'm just literally the topic is quite interesting, so that's why I'm just doing work on these things for the welfare of the society. So that's thank you.
Thank you. And I did put my email in the chat, so you can email me anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Simon and Alex. And Julia, did you want to add anything from your expertise?
Yes, thank you, Dean
I
Siedschlag.
thought so. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that intersection of displacement and human trafficking exemplifies like what we call human security dilemmas. And there are a lot of both international organizations, but also local organizations that look at that intersection and work on the local level, but also on the regional level. I think you mentioned Southeast Asia. Yes, like very often it is a regional problem, not only the domestic problem. So I think looking at the research and studies that focus not only on human trafficking, but focus on displacement directly, could be another avenue for you to look as well. And in terms of international organizations, you of course may know, but I think that UN Office on Drugs and Crime has amazing data and information for you to look at in terms of international strategies specifically, and how we can implement those depending on the region. So I hope this is helpful, and also I'll put my email in the chat, as I'm a political scientist too. So if you have questions within that domain, I'm happy to chat.
Thanks again. And before we let Monica ask her question, let me add that our current MOOC also has some literature and reports referenced, in particular in module 3, covering preventative action rather than response and recovery. So I posted the link to the MOOC earlier in the chat if you want to look it up, and you can still self-enroll. You don't need to actively take part in the MOOC. It concludes on February 2nd, but you are more than welcome, and the MOOC will stay open for your perusal after that if you want to register, and it's for free. And it has a wealth of resources, some of which I believe may help you in your research endeavors, Salman, so if that helps. Okay, wonderful. Monica, you're next in line. And
Interesting.
Oh, no, you're not muted anymore. Okay, very good.
Okay. I think it's really interesting, and especially I live in Atlanta, which, as we all know, is the hub of human trafficking in the world. But do you think there's a failure of communication because entities are siloed? Like you have the NGOs, you have the nonprofits, you have the government, and what can we do to improve that? Because Atlanta has some nonprofits that are doing tremendous work, like Wellspring, around survivors, but no one knows about that unless you've worked in that area. So how do you think we can improve that?
That's a great question. I'm happy to start. And again, Maya and Julia, y'all can jump in. I feel like that is definitely something that we heard in our interviews from our participants, regardless of their nonprofit. That is a communication issue. But I think we can start by doing things like this research project and bridging multiple disciplines to help with those silos, and even having the opportunity to share our research with fellow researchers, practitioners, students who are interested, like those who are gathered today, can be a really, really great first step, because we certainly found in our data, in our interviews, that silos are a thing that nonprofits in particular continue to try to overcome.
And I'll just add briefly to what Alex mentioned. It is the policy piece we're trying to explore in our research. And we actually found that a lot of nonprofits benefit from so-called task forces or advisory boards, and those may be actually regulated or coordinated by the government agencies. So I think it's relatively recent practice. Yes, for example, Department of Defense of State has an advisory board of human trafficking survivors. So kind of like these spaces allow these different organizations come together, share best practices, and find ways to communicate with each other. However, while those are the best practices, they are not prevalent yet. Yes, so that's some work that still needs to be done to make sure that organizations across, not only like on Eastern Seaboard, for example, yes, like, but also in the Midwest, in the West Coast, really connect with each other and find those communication strategies. And I think in interviews, we learned a lot of innovative work they're doing, and that's what we want to bring, yes, with our publications, to share some of those practices and allow other organizations to make use of them.
And I would just add to Monica, that's sort of why, even though we had a 3P model, we added that 4th P for partnership as such an important strategy to make sure that folks are being collaborative across sectors and industries. So you bring up an excellent, excellent point.
Very good. Any other questions? Then I believe we are about to conclude our program for today. If you are, once again, if you're interested in learning more about us and don't know us yet as well, that well as a college, feel free to check us out. And also on bottom right, on our college page, you are able to join us and follow us on social media if you want to make sure not to miss next opportunities, such as the next occurrence of Resilience Reimagined that will be announced on social media. So thank you so much, Maya, Alex, and Julia, for presenting. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. And be safe, be good, and see you next time. Thank you.